This video contains spoilers for WandaVision Season 1, Episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and potential spoilers for future episodes if our theories becomes a little too accurate. We don't have any insider information, by the way, so it may or may not be accurate. So if you haven't seen WandaVision Episode 4, please exit this video, go watch the episode, and then come back and join the discussion. While we may be almost halfway done with WandaVision, we still have so many questions and points to discuss. Today, Olivia and Sofia will join me for a spoiler discussion of WandaVision Episode 4 in a special episode of I Beg to Differ. So just to start off this discussion, I wanted to hear everyone's general opinions of Episode 4 and the season so far.
So this season so far, what I love about it is definitely something that Marvel has never done before, and I find it just so creative and funny. Obviously, especially the first two episodes, I definitely didn't expect it to be also so dedicated to like the sitcom format, and it's like was super playful. But then I feel like it really changes with this fourth episode. Like the whole mood completely changes. It does feel more like your typical Marvel movie, and it kind of and yeah, it's very different from the previous three episodes that were just very much embedded in like the sitcom comedy formula. But yeah, I'm really enjoying the season, and this episode has really like changed the game for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm really enjoying the season so far. I think it's so original. I really love how much that they committed to keeping it, like especially in the first episode, it was definitely like an I Love Lucy like dedication. It was great. It must have been so much fun for all the actors to film too. And I think a lot of the people who are like, oh, like it's so corny, I don't get it, it's because like they're probably taking it a little too seriously.
Yeah, I'm surprised how faithful they are to the 50s, 60s, and 70s sitcom. And it's actually very hard to actually replicate that. And they were able to replicate it so well, from the settings to the way everything was filmed to the actors acting. It was just amazing through and through. And I think the best thing about WandaVision is that it's one of those really superhero mysteries that we haven't seen in the MCU with a superhero genre before. Like, you're genuinely interested in solving this crime or this mystery that's happening in this small town. And I love how WandaVision is actually kind of scary below that sort of sweet surface that they're doing. But sort of general talk of episode 4, I think episode 4 is my favorite episode of the season so far. Not saying that it's necessarily better than the first 3 episodes, but I think it sort of provides a nice little midway conclusion to what's happening in the first 3, answer some really important questions, but also supplemented the previous 3, where if you go back and rewatch the first 3 episodes, they make sense and they become better. And I think episode 4 is just a fantastic episode overall. What we're going to do is that we're going to talk about some specific points, some like biggest questions and biggest points from this episode. And I'm just going to kind of start them one by one, and we can kind of talk about our thoughts. So let's start with that cold opening at the beginning, where Monica blipped back to existence. And at the beginning, I was confused about what was going on, because I thought, because it started similarly to how Captain Marvel opened with the flying dust. And I thought they were trying to replicate that. But then I realized that she was blipping back to existence. And I was like, this is actually the coolest thing ever, because we never saw how the blip happened aside from like it being told as a joke in Far From Home. And it's really good to see that, like the snap, the blip can also be really scary, because these people just appeared out of nowhere after 5 years. And that's pretty scary to me.
I think it's really crazy that, especially like now with the pandemic, you were hearing like in the cold open how they're like, oh my God, all these people just appeared. We're at like max capacity. It was crazy to see like a crisis situation in the Marvel universe at the same time as like the COVID thing is still here. And I think it was really creative how they showed it too, because like you have obviously like the iconic memory of the snap in Infinity War, and everyone's sort of like rotting and like drifting away into dust. But like the blip was literally the exact opposite. And I think they handled like the VFX really well, where you see like everyone sort of just magically come together, and it's so cool.
No, yeah, it was really interesting. It was also like that. Like I never thought how like traumatizing that must be to just like blip back into existence. Cause yeah, like in Far From Home, it was just kind of played for comedy. Like in the school, it'd be like, oh, we have to like repeat the grade again, and all the people that are like 3 years younger than you are now in your grade. So it's just like really funny. And I never thought about how crazy it must be, because like the people didn't even realize that they blipped. They just like came back, and like you saw with Monica how she was like, oh, where's my mom, where's everything. So it just showed me how traumatic it is to just flip back and you're already like 3 years in. So yeah, the beginning of the episode was very dark. It was kind of dark in that way, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so speaking of Monica's mom, so we found out in this episode that Maria Rambeau, who had a really big role in Captain Marvel, has passed away 2 years after the snap, which got me really sad because I really like Maria as a character in Captain Marvel. Do we think it was a good creative choice to kill her off screen? Do we think she's ever going to appear in any future projects, kind of like Peggy Carter? Because Peggy died off screen in Civil War, but then she still kind of came back in later movies and a huge impact. Do we think that's going to be for Maria, or do we think Maria's sort of done in the MCU?
Honestly, I think she might be sort of done because I don't know how much they plan to do with like the Captain Marvel storyline on Earth. I think the next Captain Marvel movie, especially considering like the direction that the MCU is headed as a whole in the movies right now, I feel like it's going to be more otherworldly instead of just remaining on Earth all the time. But I do so having her dying off screen. I mean, I don't really have a problem with it since like I think it's nice that they made her like the founder of Sword. I thought that was really interesting. This is sort of parallel to how Peggy's like the founder of Shield. This is cool.
No, yeah, I don't think she might just maybe she might come back like in flashback or something like that. But yeah, I feel like her character and like her journey like already feels like ended. And in a really good way, again, by her like finding Sword, and now her daughter like being a big member of Sword, and now being like a head figure in like this new show. So yeah, I don't think she's going to come back. Maybe some flashbacks, more references, but I think her journey's over. But still, amazing character. Absolutely loved her.
Yeah, I have a feeling that her legacy will continue in the MCU since she founded Sword, and that's still probably she's gonna be referenced a lot, maybe like Director Rambo, kind of like Director Carter from Shield. And also, I think one thing interesting detail is that when they show Maria's name in the Sword base, they show Maria Photon Rambo. Photon is obviously one of the aliases of I think Monica from the comics when she was a superhero. So maybe she's going to adopt her mom's name, kind of like how the Avengers adopted Carol's name, and sort of carry that legacy on. So I think while I am sad that Maria has passed on, but I am happy to see that her legacy will at least live on in the MCU. So I wanted to move on to talk a little bit about Sword. So we know that Sword in the MCU is actually a sentient weapons division, which is kind of different from what it was in the comics, because in the comics, Sword is very much in the space and fighting sort of sentient beings. And one of the details that they mentioned is that they were developing nanotech. The last time, obviously, we saw nanotech was with the Mark 50 and Mark 85 in Infinity War and Endgame. And that leads us to have one of the questions where, one of the Disney Plus shows that's coming out is called Armor Wars. And there is a comic series that talks about how Tony Stark's tech was stolen by the villains and everybody just basically had an armor, like Kingpin had an armor, like everybody just had an Iron Man armor. So do we think that this is a tease that's going to lead us to Armor Wars, that somehow these villains are going to gain possession of Iron Man's nanotech and they're going to make their own Mark 50s and Mark 85s?
I definitely think that it's some sort of connection. I think a lot of the Disney Plus shows, similarly to how integrally like all of the MCU is connected, I think the Disney Plus shows are going to be really influencing each other. Like, and we'll see as they come out, like where the connections lie. So I think that's actually a great idea.
No, yeah, it reminds me a lot of like even just the beginning of Marvel, where like all the movies with all their separate superheroes, like they weren't obviously fully connected yet before Avengers, but you still had like the references and like Nick Fury showing up for like one movie towards the end, or like the references of Shield. So you show that connection, but it's still not like, like a major crossover. But I think like the Disney Plus shows will kind of be like that, just kind of like reference little bits of each other.
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting because we do see a lot of heroes and villains already using Stark's tech in the movies. Like Ultron came from Stark's tech, Vulture has Stark's tech, Mysterio has Stark's tech. Maybe whoever is in Spider-Man 3 will also have Stark's tech. So I think you probably see a sort of villain version of the Avengers, all these people who hate Stark, which is basically everybody else in the MCU. and that could be kind of interesting. So speaking of the sort of beginning of the show, of course, we have the return of a fan favorite character from Ant-Man and Wasp, Jimmy Woo. And one of the details I really liked was that when he was like, my name is James E. Woo, he actually did that card trick that he learned from Scott from Ant-Man and the Wasp. I was like, 5 years, Jimmy has not wasted his time. He just learned the card trick, and that was amazing.
Yeah, I think that was pretty awesome. It took me, I had such a delayed reaction. It took me half an hour to figure that out. I was like, I know that guy. And then like later it was like, oh, it's Jimmy Woo.
Yeah, and I also thought that gag about Westview versus Eastview, that was kind of funny when he was asking him like, oh, where are you from then? And then that cop was like, oh, I'm from Eastview. That was kind of hilarious. But one of the questions I did have was that Jimmy Woo said that at the beginning he was trying to find a missing witness under the witness protection program. But then that person kind of just got not mentioned later on. It was like, that was just a missing person. But who is that missing witness? A lot of people said it could be Ralph, Agnes's husband. My husband Ralph like never appeared in the first 3 episodes.
Oh,
Some people say whoever this is will be integral, maybe Mephisto, maybe someone really surprising who's going to appear. So who do we think this missing witness is going to be? And I guess also by extension, who do you guys think Ralph is? Or is he just sort of this random name drop character?
You know, I'll be honest, till this moment, I really just thought it was just like a gag, like with the sitcom. It just really, a big part of like the comedy was like with Ralph. But now, yeah, I'm really thinking if it could be that missing person, or even maybe it's someone that we already know from the Marvel universe that's stuck in there as well. But yeah, now I'm thinking, I honestly just thought of Ralph as just a comedic relief, like just the name dropping. But yeah, there could be some twists with what Ralph does in the future.
Yeah, honestly, I definitely had it's the same thought, especially because you know how in sitcoms, they always have that one character who's like just always mentioned but never there, and like no one knows what they look like. I thought it was just like a reference to that, but like it'd be a really nice subversion if it were to be someone really important and none of us paid attention to it.
Yeah, because Agnes always says things that have different meanings. Like when she first said, oh, Wanda, charm, or like something like, oh, this is going to be such a gas, or something like that. And a lot of people have already speculated, as we'll talk about later, that Agnes is Agatha Harkness, who was a witch from the Salem witch trial period. From the comics, she was a mentor of Wanda. And actually in the comics, Wanda had 2 children, Tommy and Billy, which are conveniently also named that in the movies, who were actually fake sort of illusions from Mephisto. Mephisto kind of tricked Wanda to have these children so he can have her chaos magic. And so far, everything seems to be going to that direction. So I think Ralph may or may not actually be a very important character. Like, what if Ralph is Mephisto kind of pulling these strings in the background? So I kind of wanted to, you know, kind of going on to Ralph, I want to talk a little bit more about Wanda's world. I think that it's been confirmed that most of the residents there are actual residents at Westview when Jimmy said, oh, it was a missing town. And they seem either unconscious about their existence in this world, or there's really good actors for pretending like they know what this world is. But that leaves me with one question, is that when Monica got into the world as Geraldine, did she really know that she was actually from another world? She was like trying to spy on Wanda. Or did she actually just genuinely feel like she was Geraldine and didn't remember what it was until Wanda had the children, and then she started asking her, like, oh yeah, was your brother killed by Ultron?
I have like a very loose theory about this. Okay, so basically I think that all the residents of like Westview, Wanda has them under a spell where like they're not conscious of the fact that they're playing roles, but at some point they see something and they become conscious of it, but they know they can't, like they know the whole thing you can't do is like upset Wanda. That's what Geraldine did wrong. If you upset Wanda, then like bad things happen, you get kicked out. We still don't know what happened to that beekeeper guy. Well, I don't know. We don't know what Wanda did to him, but I think that basically they become aware of the fact that they're trapped, even though that they don't know the entire nature of the situation. And that's why when Geraldine went in the house when Wanda was pregnant, like Agnes was whispering outside to the other neighbor, like, oh, like she's in there, like what is she gonna do? Like,
It's very suspicious who these neighbors are. And I think that the most important thing is that Mr. Hart from the first episode, his superior who choked on his food, he never appeared again in later episodes. Like when they were doing a magic trick in episode 2, Mrs. Hart was there, but Mr. Hart wasn't. And it makes you wonder what happened to him. And one of the most important things is that when Mrs. Hart said, "Oh, stop it," like when Mr. Hart was choking, everybody thought that was just a glitch in the system. But what if she's deliberately doing it because she's going to pretend that everything's okay because she's afraid that Wanda is going to punish her or something? I think that makes the show like much scarier because you have to actually pretend that everything's all right when you know clearly that everything is not.
No, yeah, that scene was very, very creepy, especially obviously since before that it was just very dedicated to the 50s sitcom, that it was just really funny and gaggy, and then you just see the choking scene and you see how like Wanda's reacting to it. And yeah, Mrs. Hart's reaction was definitely like the scariest, as you just went like, stop it, and you kind of like know she's like breaking and like kind of finding her reality and just breaking off like this spell, kind of like you described, Olivia. But yeah, those scenes where like you see people like kind of breaking out of their reality, or you see Wanda having like her fantasy essentially to like being like destroyed or threatened, those are definitely the scariest scenes from the show so far.
Yeah, and I remember after we like finished the fourth episode, Sophia and I were talking about how we thought like we realized that basically since Wanda is one of the people who disappeared in the snap, when she blipped back, like basically like since the people who like disappeared aren't aware of the fact that they're missing time, and she came back, like Vision's death just happened to her. So like it makes sense that she's freaking out about this now and all this is happening now, because like I guess just to cope with the massive sudden trauma, with the fact that there was some sort of mass tragedy in combination with the fact that like Vision died, it makes sense for her to have some sort of like psychic break.
Yeah, I think the residents, even Monica, I think they're in that middle sort of gray area of being conscious and unconscious. I feel like when Monica said, "I don't like," when Wanda was asking her like, "What did you say about Pietro?" And I feel like she was genuinely confused at that point. But then there are sort of these little shards of reality that's in her mind that she subconsciously knows. And I think also one of the evidence was like when Jimmy Woo was looking at that video of Monica, he was like, "Oh, this is not like the boss lady that I met yesterday," which I think in some sense, I don't think they're completely like acting it out. I think that's how they're acting in that world. And it's interesting because also Herb seems to know a lot about this world, that neighbor who was cutting on the walls, and he was about to slip the words. He's saying like, "Oh, we are all," and Vision is sort of asking him like, "Oh, what were you saying?" And he didn't say anything. I feel like they know that this is a fake world, but somehow I feel like they're also forced to do the daily routines of a 50s sitcom character, which just makes this entire thing much more interesting.
Yeah, I know another question a lot of people had was like about why the time periods keep changing. And I think that like, so in the first episode, you know how Wanda sees that helicopter and it's the only thing in color because it's from the real world, or and she has to like try to justify that by making it into like a toy helicopter instead of a drone. So like I think because of the fact that it was in color, that disconnect of like the real world coming into her fantasy, she had to sort of shift time periods to be in accordance with that, so she can keep pretending that all of this is real.
Yeah, one of the questions I had regarding that was that some of the things that people or things get into the world and they change into another form. Some of it is really interesting. I think the most important example was Agent Franklin, who obviously was the beekeeper. But then why did he sort of turn into a beekeeper when he entered that world? And why is there like bees around him? And it's just related to that sort of hexagon shape that all of us and Sword are sort of wondering about, like, what are these hexagonal shapes like represent?
So yeah, in the beginning, I thought it was something more like, because obviously he came in with like a futuristic suit. So then when he's coming into the 50s world, the suit has to translate from something of the period, kind of like how we saw with like the drone that turned into like a toy helicopter. So in the beginning, I thought it probably has to do with that. But yeah, it was just obviously very ominous. And then with the hexagon, it definitely shows that there's more there. The bees also came up, which is pretty random. It should have just been like a normal suit if it was just that straight logic. So yeah, there's definitely more to it than that. But yeah, I guess just like the simple answer would be that for Wanda's fantasy to keep going, she has to translate it to the time period.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's like a huge like lore significance to there being bees around him. I honestly think they did it for like the effect and the ambiance, and it worked because it was super creepy.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can say is that maybe bees are related to like Mephisto or something, and that they will. I'm sure they will explain that later on, like why bees, why hexagons. But I was thinking one of the things is that the hexagons kind of represent a beehive, right? Like, what if this entire bubble reality is sort of the beehive, and one is like the queen, and everybody else has to sort of work for her as the worker bees, and they can't really say anything. They just do what they're asked for, and this is like a whole beehive that they're entrapped in because the hexagonal shape kind of like entraps the images in it in the sort of 70s 80s intro that we saw in episodes 2 and 3, and I wonder if that's what they were trying to go for.
Wow, that's some amazing symbolism right there that I did not think of. Oh no, yeah, because yeah, Wanda really is just like you said, like the queen bee of like this whole thing and taking control of everything. And I also find it really interesting when Vision, I forgot which episode it was, when Vision is the one that tried to threaten her fantasy. And instead of obviously like attacking him, she just like goes back and like replays it. So it's also interesting how like each character when they like Vision's kind of like the exception, obviously, that when he even tries to step in, like she just goes back in time. And again, also, well, I think we should talk about it. What do you think like Vision is exactly? Is it just like her own consciousness? Does she like have his like we also see like glimpses of like his dead body. Like she just like turn around and sees his dead body. So I don't, yeah, really want to ask you as if what you think Vision is, if he's just like an extension of Wanda or if there is part of Vision there or something.
I honestly I don't want to think this, but because we've established that like most of the people around Wanda are like real like citizens of Pleasantville, right? Like there's like they're not like illusions. And even though Vision could be illusion, I feel like she's like animating his like corpse, like with her powers, which is super creepy. But
Yeah, I am of the exact same thought. I think they kind of made it obvious with that scene where Wanda looks at him and he's now the corpse that we saw him in Infinity War. That she kind of blinks and kind of takes a breath, takes a deep breath, and then sees him and he's normal again. I feel like Vision is just kind of like a puppet where she's animating him to do all these stuff. But what is weird about that is that Vision seems to have his own thoughts. He seems to know that something is wrong. He has conversations with other residents without Wanda's presence, which makes me still think that Vision's just a corpse. But I think Wanda kind of created a spirit for him that the corpse him sort of moved by itself inside this reality. But when he breaks out of that reality, he's going to become a corpse again. That's why Wanda said, oh, like we can't leave this place, is because once they leave that place, the bubble will be shattered and Vision will die again. And I think that's probably what they were going for. But the really creepy thing is I wonder what other people see Vision as. Do they just see him as that scary corpse and they have to act like everything's all right? And that just makes the whole thing like so much more creepy, especially when you consider all the things Wanda and Vision did together in episodes 1 and 2. I feel like that's a very, very dark way to start Phase 4. And that's definitely something that Marvel has never done before.
No, yeah. I guess for me, yeah, I just find it interesting that like yeah, now like Wanda gave him like his own like consciousness and that he's breaking and that he's like breaking from it and almost like he's becoming more and more an independent thinker and challenging more as the episodes go on. Like in the first 2 episodes, he is like exactly like what Wanda wants him to be. And then as you see more, he's questioning more. He feels he's gaining like the influence of the neighbors. So I feel like he's also like the thing that she programmed his dead corpse with, it's like actually like growing and evolving as the episodes go on, and maybe he finds a way to break out, who knows.
yeah, I mean, especially because thinking about like who Vision was originally, like the most amazing thing about him was the ability of like whatever animated him to grow and evolve. So like if I certainly think it's within Wanda's powers to replicate that under certain circumstances. And if you do try to replicate that, you can't do it without the inevitable like realization that it's going to evolve again. Like
For sure. Yeah, these are all really interesting theories about Vision. I think we'll definitely get to Vision a little bit later too, because I think the ending, he kind of plays a significant role there too. But also in the middle of the episode, we have another return of a very old MCU character, Darcy Lewis, who is now finally not an intern. She is a doctor now. They're calling her Dr. Lewis. So yeah, I'm personally happy to see that. I love that they're not actually ignoring Phase One; they're actually continuing with it. Of course, I'm happy that Natalie Portman is returning as Jane Foster. I want to see Tim Roth as Abomination again in She-Hulk. So excited. So, do we think this opens the door for some of the other sort of actors from older MCU movies to return? Some examples in mind are like Selvig, Eric Selvig from the first Thor movies. We have, I think, the leader Samuel Stearns from the Hulk movie, where like Hulk's blood got into his head and his head all grew like big and everything. So, do we think this opens up the doors for like more OG MCU characters to return?
I think it certainly opens the door. I'm not sure how open I want that door to be because as much as I love a lot of the old MCU characters, I don't think it's necessary for like all of them to be like in the new shows. I think Darcy's a decently like appropriate choice because I feel like she's obviously taking on a different role than what she was in the Thor movies, which was 99% comic relief. But I think it's interesting that they chose to bring her back because I don't know, Darcy's cool, but like you obviously don't want to have too much like needless callbacks.
Yeah, that's why I'd be afraid if they start just bringing a bunch of more like Phase One characters, because even though it would be exciting, because like seeing all these characters again, I definitely just want to make sure it has a point and it's not just like, oh my god, a character from like Phase One. So yeah, her point is definitely like very relevant. She's now a doctor, astrophysicist. She's the one that even like discovered like the broadcasting signal and how they can see the show. So she can definitely contribute to WandaVision. And so yeah, I just hope if they keep doing that, it definitely has like a clear point and it's not just like a quick reference. But yeah, I think it opens the door. And an Abomination Tim Roth appearance does sound crazy.
Yeah, to think that that character actually is coming back, because they were talking like ever since 2015 that they were going to bring him back for Age of Ultron. And then he was such an unpopular villain, but because Marvel keeps teasing us about him, now he's like actually famous and popular. So like when people said Abomination, the entire world was like, yay, Abomination. Whereas like years ago, they'd be like, we don't actually care about this character. So I think it's cool what they're doing. Might have been a strategy all along. What they were like, Feige might have planned this out from like 2010 or something, which is really interesting. And can we just sort of talk about how great of an on-screen chemistry Darcy has with Jimmy? Some of the scenes they share were like extremely hilarious. Like that scene where Jimmy was like, I can't believe Wanda and Vision having children. And then Darcy's like, you want one? And then Jimmy starts talking like, oh, I'm imagining this little Jimmy Woo with his FBI badge. And Darcy's like, no, I'm actually talking about the chip, not your children. I thought that these scenes are just amazing. And I heard people already like putting relationship, like writing like, I don't know, like fantasies about like Darcy and Jimmy and stuff like that, which is like what fans do for every show. But
Oh wow, it's just been one day.
Yeah, it really has just been one day.
A day.
One episode.
One episode. I mean, as the show shows us, a lot can happen in one day, because everything that happened in the first 3 episodes seems to be happening within like a matter of a day or two, which is honestly just kind of crazy of how the time works differently inside and outside. So one of the coolest scenes from this episode, in my opinion, was the scene where they're actually finding the people from the sitcom, when they're scanning their faces and actually finding their real reality. So when they say their like real names, I thought that was just the coolest thing of all time. But there are some subtle details there that I wanted to mention. So remember that scene where they're having this whole wall of the paper with their New Jersey licenses? The only person aside from Vision and Wanda, obviously, who didn't have that license was Agnes. Agnes didn't have a resident license. So I feel like that kind of confirms, and also, with the information that she has on this world, I feel like she is pretty much 99% Agatha Harkness, which I think confirms the existence of Mephisto in this show, which we'll talk a little bit more about him later. One of the other questions is that Dottie, who didn't appear yet when they were doing the wall thing, she doesn't have an information. And then when Darcy asked Jimmy, I think like, who is that? And Jimmy's like, oh, that's like another normal person. I feel like that's a misdirect. Like, who is this Dottie character? Is she Mephisto? Like, who is she? Because in that scene where she was like talking about, oh, the devil's in the details, and then Agnes like, that's not the only place he is. Like, what is she referring to back there?
I think that's so awesome. And even though I definitely think that Wanda has I think Wanda's powers are significant enough where she could be doing all of this on her own. I think that's true on its own. But I also think it would be cool if she like made like a deal with the devil sort of thing in order to like maintain this thing. So like if she like somehow made a deal with Mephisto and he's behind this, so that'd be so cool. I just really want to see Mephisto in the MCU. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, kind of moving on to the next scene, immediate next scene, where I think a lot of us have guessed that in episode 2, where Jimmy Woo is the person giving the transmission to Wanda, saying like, Wanda, who's doing this to you? But one of the weird things I noticed was that when they failed, like when that scene cuts to like Dottie's hand being injured, it cuts to a structure watch commercial. But it seems that no one is paying attention to that. Like literally that's Hydra right there. Like, why aren't you guys paying attention to that? And I was wondering, like, is there more to that over there? Where like I feel like the showrunners wouldn't make a mistake like that where they're like, oh, these people are just missing this Hydra thing. So what do you guys think is like going on there? Like, did they just not pay attention to the commercials?
Honestly, I don't know. I remember for the first like 3 episodes, I thought that the commercial breaks were like a time thing. I thought like temporally when one thing would happen, it would cut to commercial immediately. But like they kind of broke the pattern, I think, in the 3rd episode when they. But I still think there's a significance to them. They're definitely not inconsequential. I feel like they wouldn't be there if it was just nothing.
I developed the theory. So back when the first 2 episodes came out, I think a lot of people were guessing what they meant. And I think the most prevailing theories was that the first episode relates to Wanda's parents' death because Stark created the missile. Stark Industries created missiles that killed her parents. And then they waited for that missile to kill them, like as Wanda said in Age of Ultron. And then you see the red light beeping on the Stark toaster, kind of like a bomb. But also the most scary detail was that there was a scene where this thing goes like beep, beep, beep. And then the lady was staring at the screen and it's like awkward silence. Like maybe that's when the bomb was like there in their house. And then it was like beep, 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 beep. And then they were waiting for that bomb to go off and kill them, but it didn't. And then the second commercial was Strucker, obviously. That was her experimentation on Hydra. And that's when I thought that, oh, maybe each commercial is going to be about Wanda's traumatic past. Like maybe one of the commercials is going to be like about Quicksilver dying. And another one's going to be about Ultron. Like you have this Roomba with like red eyes or something. But then the third commercial came out. And I think it disproved my theories because the third commercial has nothing to do with Wanda's past. A lot of people said it was like related to Tahiti from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and like that amazing place that Coulson was talking about. But then considering that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't really part of the MCU that Kevin Feige is doing, I don't think that's what they're doing. I think the 3 commercials together kind of tell Wanda's story that the past and the real world sucks. But look at this amazing fantasy world that you can be in. I think these are what the 3 commercials tell us. And it makes me interested to see what other commercials are in the line because I feel like these 3 kind of have a complete arc.
Yeah. Even though you said the 3rd commercial does break the pattern about being about Wanda's past, it might be about what she's doing now. Because it's like the whole 3rd commercial is about like getting away to like your destination or like going to like a fantasy and like the ideal place. And a sitcom literally like it's the idealized version of like American Family that like Wanda never got to have because every time she got close, it was taken away from her. So I guess it sort of represents the arc of what Wanda went through to get here.
I heard this really scary theory online that the commercial man and commercial lady are actually in the appearance of Wanda's parents. And they're the ones actually showing the commercials to her, like having her dead parents do that to her. And oh, like that's cold.
Oh, that's so dark. I mean, you know, she is animating her like boyfriend's corpse. So I mean, this is a dark show already. that wouldn't be too far off, honestly. Wow.
I really didn't expect it to be this dark, but I really like the tonal shift they pull off with every moment in the episode where someone like has the cognitive dissonance and they're like something's not right because the sound design is so good. The sound design is so good that you're drifting along, you're in sitcom format, you're enjoying the show, and then like the music drops out and they amplify like everybody's mics and so their voices get really loud, and then subtly like new music creeps in and like all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is a little scary.
Yeah, like I think one of the complaints that a lot of people have for a lot of MCU movies, obviously with the exception of Avengers and Captain America, the Winter Soldier, was that the music was not very memorable, that there's really no theme which you can like really pay attention to. But in WandaVision, like in that third episode, after Geraldine slash Monica talked about Ultron, the music kind of starts to tense up and you're like feeling the, sort of the intense atmosphere that was like surrounding the room. And I think the music is just done so well here. And that just makes me excited for all the future MCU Phase 4 projects, because it really seems like Marvel's paying attention to the criticism and actually taking more risks and actually perfecting like every single aspect of their story, which I think is just absolutely amazing.
No, yeah, just like I feel like it also does have to do with obviously like just having like the Disney Plus, the streaming, and and usually like just like with shows you can be more experimental because you can just like have like this episode and then you can like you can work on like an episode base, and just having like streaming and what we've talked about in like a lot of our episodes, that usually with streaming you're kind of like allowed to take more risks, you can be a bit more creative. And it's also with shows now, it's like smaller scale. I mean, with WandaVision, we've been dealing with like the Infinity War and the Endgame with these really, really big projects that you can't really risk to be like super risky or be like super original, be really creative. But then with this like much more like smaller scale show that just focuses on two Marvel characters, you can definitely just play around more and just do more of a character study and take more risk and be more creative. So that's why I really like this new phase of Marvel, that they're taking it like a bit more smaller scale, which allows them to be just more creative.
So kind of moving on towards the end of the episode, where we see Wanda expelling Geraldine slash Monica from her house, and the way she's acting is sort of full on villain mode, especially like that one scene where Wanda's kind of smiling. She was like, "You're not my friend," and she's smiling like all evil villains do. And so, obviously Monica at the end said it was Wanda. It was all Wanda. So do we think Wanda is the actual villain of the show, that she's actually directing and writing her own story in here? Or do we think that there is actually Mephisto in the background, but one is going to grow to become the next sort of big villain in the MCU after WandaVision and become the antagonist of Doctor Strange into the Multiverse of Madness?
Um, I do think it would be really cool if Wanda just turned into a villain, like, because I mean it's such a great story to tell when you think about it. It just highlights all the dramatic points of all things we just talked about, like Endgame and Infinity War. You have that on a big scale, but on a smaller scale, if you see how it just like destroys like a hero who everyone previously loved, I feel like it had that impact is such a good story.
It reminds me a lot of like, the Jean Grey, like Dark Phoenix, of like you have this really powerful superhero with like just so much power and goes through so much that eventually just the power and the trauma get to you, and then yeah, you become like the next villain. And I could definitely see that as like Scarlet Witch's next step, because I think we talked about like Scarlet Witch has had such a traumatic life. Oh my God, with her parents, then Quicksilver, then Vision, like everything has been taken away from her, and she also has so much power. And now we're just seeing it with WandaVision how much power she has. So everything just like will probably get into her head. And yeah, maybe we will see her in this antagonist. I think I would prefer that. Seeing her like come out as an antagonist, and not having like someone in the background, or maybe having both, because I think that would make sense in like Wanda's story and like what she will become because of her past and everything that's happened to her.
Yeah, I think if you look at Wanda's history in the MCU, she kind of loses at the end of every movie. She starts out in Age of Ultron as sort of a villain, but at the end of Age of Ultron, everybody went home, but then Quicksilver died. And then she kind of turned crazy with that. And in Civil War, she accidentally destroys the buildings in Lagos, Nigeria, which is indirectly causing the Avengers to split apart, which is kind of what Ultron said, like, "Oh, you'll tear them apart from the inside." So you're like making connections. And at the end of Civil War, she was imprisoned in the raft. And then at Infinity War, she loses her boyfriend and she dies at the end. And in Endgame, everybody came back, but like her boyfriend does not come back. And when you've been through this much in like this many movies, I feel like it's only natural for you to kind of turn crazy and be bad. And also, Wanda is a very misunderstood character that everyone kind of treats her as a villain throughout these movies. I don't think anybody really trusts her. And she has that immense power that can even overpower Thanos. Like even Thanos is scared of her. So I think it will be very, very interesting to see what Wanda can do in the next few movies. I think she has a great potential to become a great villain, having this sort of tragic storyline. And I don't even think they need to redeem her somehow in the end. Like if they just end this entire thing in tragedy and have like Wanda actually die or like something in Doctor Strange 2, I think that's going to leave a very deep impact, not only within the MCU, but also to us to see that, oh, a hero can turn evil too. And to make the hero her own villain in her show, I think that's pretty daring, pretty awesome. However, I don't think they're going to do that because Agnes is there. And, we know Agnes is probably up to no good unless they kind of make her a good person like the Skrulls from Captain Marvel. So we'll see what they do with Wanda from this point on. So I kind of also wanted to go back to Vision a little bit. So we kind of talked about how Vision's kind of like a corpse who's just kind of walking around, like zombie Vision. Do we think Vision's gonna come back in a later MCU project? Like, is he actually gonna be revived or somehow, or is he just dead? Or is Ultron going to somehow come back and take over his body once again and become that sort of ultimate form that he wanted to be in Age of Ultron?
Well, I don't think Ultron's coming back. I think Marvel learned that lesson when that movie came out and people had opinions. I don't think they're gonna take that risk again. But and as much as I would love to have Vision back because Vision's great, I think I should commit to like I like when Marvel kills characters and they stay dead because like we can't just keep going in this endless cycle of no real consequences. And I think that is important to maintain. But I think this is a good workaround to still have him in a property, but not like back.
No, yeah, I don't think he'll come back. And this is a really creative way for us to like see him again in like quotation marks, because it's not really him. It's just like, well, Wanda programming him in his dead corpse. It's so morbid when I say it, but it's true. Um, and so yeah, I don't think he will be back. And kind of like Olivia, even though like inside I would love to have Vision again, definitely would just make like his death like kind of like useless, and like the emotion and like all the emotion from Infinity War would just be taken out if he comes back again. And then I'll just think about that for like every other superhero or any other character that dies in Marvel, not playing like by their rules. And yeah, hopefully Ultron does not come back because not one of my fave villains, but who knows. But yeah, I think this is what we will see a Vision, and I honestly think it's enough.
I have a bold theory about Vision. So remember in Infinity War, Bruce said something like, "Oh, your mind is made off of a complex like array of consciousness, like Tony, me, Ultron, Jarvis, like all of them learning from one another." And he said that if we take the Mind Stone out, maybe there could still be a lot of Vision left, even the best parts. So that quote kind of makes me think like the consciousness of Tony, Bruce, Ultron, and Jarvis still kind of exist in Vision. It's just that his Mind Stone is now ripped out. So I feel like what if, because now that Captain America's back, it's just a matter of time before Tony Stark comes back in the MCU in some way, shape, or form. One way he did come back in the comics after he died was that he turned into an AI, which is kind of like what we saw at the end of Endgame, where he's this sort of hologram that tells people what to do. What if Vision is the key to bringing back these characters? And they somehow, like in Armor Wars or like Ironheart or something like that, somebody takes out like Tony's consciousness from Vision and puts it in sort of that program, like that barf program that he created in Endgame and Far From Home, and then
Yeah.
bring Tony back in that sense. And that could probably open the doors for Ultron eventually coming back, but you guys don't like Ultron, so we're going to kind of leave him to the side for now. But I think the most important part is that what if Vision is dead, but a sort of evolved version of Jarvis returns to become a new AI, and the person he's going to aid is Riri Williams in Ironheart. They're going to bring Jarvis back and they're going to put him inside her armor, so he lives on as an AI again, kind of having his arc go full circle. Because I don't think they're done with Paul Bettany in the MCU yet. He's too brilliant for them to just be like, yeah, you're dead, man, so goodbye.
That is a bold theory indeed. But first, let me clarify. It's not that I don't like Ultron as a character. I love Ultron as a character. What the MCU did with Ultron, however, was not great.
I just really think that he deserves a redemption because he could be such an OP character. Like he could get into the internet. He could mess with everything.
Yep.
They didn't.
He should have been an OP character. He should have been like the threat that Ultron poses is just ridiculous. And like when I see every time I think about Age of Ultron, I'm like, why was he like that? Why was he like Tony Stark 2.0? There was no reason.
Oh,
Yeah, the way he talks about like, oh, the dinosaurs and like everything.
You care about the dinosaur?
him trying to be funny just did not work. I was not for it.
Yeah, but I do think James Spader did a good job as Ultron's voice. I think Ultron had a great voice. He has some great like facial expressions. I like the character. I just don't think he was done well.
Absolutely. And if you remember, I think the second trailer for the movie when it came out was that whole Pinocchio thing where he was like singing like the strings thing. And it was a creepy trailer. And that's what I thought the movie was going to be like. And it was not like that. And I was very disappointed.
Yeah, somebody made a theory about Ultron in WandaVision is that when they talked about like Ultron in episode 3, after the I think this is like a stretch, but after the episode is over, sometimes it would suggest like related content, and then they suggested Age of Ultron. People were like, is this like meaning the Ultron's coming back in WandaVision? That's a little bit of stretch, but you know that would be kind of cool. That would be kind of cool.
Man, the more I think about it, the more I want your theory about like Wanda like becoming a villain and like dying to be right. I feel like that's such a good idea,
Oh,
especially because it's not like she's like a villain where like, oh, I hate her. It's just that like you gotta feel bad. I mean, I kind of understand.
no, yeah, it's one of those villains that you understand. It's kind of like a Magneto. Like I don't hate Magneto. Like because I really like I don't like obviously I don't hate Magneto. It's just one of those villains that had like that's like so complex and so grounded that like you kind of like understand and him with like his dynamic with like Xavier. Like he's not like this like pure villain like you have with like an Ultron, right? Like it's just so like it's so then Scarlet Witch is kind of like that. Someone that's gone through like so much, is very complex, and you like don't really hate her because you kind of understand with everything that's happened to her. And it just makes perfect sense for her to go through that journey.
Yeah, she has parallels with I think Killmonger and Thanos. Both are characters that we really relate with. Like all three of these characters are treated horribly by their societies and the worlds they're in. And like putting yourself in that kind of position, like if you grew up like that, like who would why would you want to fight for this world instead of destroy it when the world has wronged you so much? But I think unlike Killmonger and Thanos, I think one as a character takes a step further because we got introduced to her as a hero and we've loved her throughout all these years. And for her to turn into a villain, that's going to be a real tearjerker right there. So yeah, moving on to our last discussion topic, which is, of course, we know how episode 4 deviated from that sitcom format, but we know obviously the sitcom format has to come back because the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s, but they can't just go back to where episode 1 is like, oh, happy sitcom, like pretending nothing's happening. So how do we think the sitcom format is going to go on from now on?
I think that we're gonna see Wanda operating as Wanda, like not as like fantasy Wanda. I think we're gonna see her in the. I think more things are gonna start to happen in the sitcom world that she has to like address, and that's how we'll follow like what's going on in like the fantasy world.
I think like we're gonna have like more episodes like episode 4, where it's kind of like turning back into like real world and then sitcom. I think like we're gonna have less episodes that's more like episodes 1 and 2 that it was just in the sitcom world. I think we're gonna be turning like more back and forth between these two worlds. And yeah, I think we're gonna start seeing like this fantasy breaking more and more apart, so kind of lose its sitcom formula because we're going to see more people like questioning this vision, all the neighbors, Scarlet Witch, Wanda possibly like trying really hard to fix this fantasy, which kind of like might make it worse. So definitely I think the sitcom might kind of deteriorate because well her fantasy is kind of deteriorating, so that formula has to go away slowly as the episodes progress.
Yeah, I think they're gonna have to literally drag Wanda kicking and screaming back into reality.
Oh my god, that would be kind of terrible because like remember how happy Wanda was at the beginning of the season? It's just sad to think about like all the bad stuff that's gonna happen to her. because the comic book storyline of Vision and the Scarlet Witch ended horribly for Wanda, and it's honestly like the saddest thing of all time. But speaking of the sitcom format, I agree with Sophia. I think we're going to see more cutting back and forth between the sitcom and the real world. And I would love if they could do more like crazy aspect ratio changes throughout these episodes. That would be pretty amazing. But I think what would also make this show kind of like add a bit of humor to it, which is what they've been doing, it's kind of like, send some stuff from the outside to the inside, but when it turns to the inside, it turns into something like completely bizarre and weird, and they have to sort of figure out what's going on, like on the inside. Vision has to sort of figure out what's going on in the inside, but the outside people kind of have to go back and sort of be like, oh, we're also going to explore like what is going on. I think that's going to be like really cool to explore, so I'm very excited for the next few episodes.
No, yeah, I'm really, really, really excited to see how much more changes and how many more answers we're going to get probably.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect to be this pumped going into it. Like I mean, I expected quality from the show, but I was really surprised at the creative direction that they took it in. So I'm definitely really excited to see the rest of the season.
Thank you for tuning into this very special episode of I Beg to Differ, which we talked about WandaVision episode 4. We'll do another one for episode 5 next week, and for every week with all the Disney Plus Marvel shows and some interesting shows that you guys are perhaps passionate about. So be sure to subscribe to this channel and sign up for Div so you can be in one of these shows yourself. And be sure to also sign up for exec positions at Div if you're interested in film festival and all kinds of fun stuff related to film like that. Don't forget that our festival will happen, I think, either in April or May, so be sure to check that out. And we look forward to seeing another episode of Spoiler Talk next week.